I bought this coat for $5, and this is the only time I've ever worn it because I had to fit 2 braces through my sleeves. Okay, this story is either called Mise en Scene or Joni Mitchell Revisited. Johnny was out looking for a Korean Elvis impersonator who'd sold dope to his kid. I'd never heard him use the word gook before, but when he found his son overdosed on the sofa, it was the only thing he seemed able to say. Tom and I were talking about the most glaring flaws in the personalities of other people we knew. Then I said something to him about Jill, and he got real upset. What I said had been perfectly innocuous. He was probably just upset because he knew I'd known Jill a lot longer than he had, and he was the one who'd taken her hand in marriage. I wasn't his best man or anything, but I captured the whole wedding on videotape. I never had sex with Jill, but I'd seen her in nothing but a bathing suit more times than I could count, and she still asked me to rub suntan lotion on her back at the poolside sometimes. I knew her back when she had a shaved head and hair in her armpits. She used to wear a dress with zebra stripes, but she sold it through a consignment store long before she ever met Tom. Candy was stoned, taking a walk through Griffith Park, contemplating the mise-en-scene of her life and everyone else's. She checked her watch, but the sun was shining too brightly off its face for her to see the time. Her husband Patrick was at home, holed up in the basement, watching episode after episode of The Sopranos, casually neglecting all those screener DVDs that had been sent over by the film studios for him to consider for the Academy Awards. More than once, he'd pleaded with me to explain to him just why he'd fallen in love with a pole dancer. "I don't even know her real name," he'd say to me, close to tears. Unless her mom actually named her Candy, and wouldn't that just be an even more frightening notion? Why did I ever leave Jeannie and the girls? Is there evil in my heart? Is there room in heaven for a man like me? When I first met Richard, he was working the counter at a movie theater, selling me a ticket for a film dubbed from Farsi into English. I would have preferred subtitles, but you take what you can get in East LA. Richard's first book was coming out in October, but when we met for coffee later, he told me it was the only thing he ever planned to write. I asked what he planned to do then, if he wasn't going to be a writer. He said he would practice medicine. "So you'll go to medical school?" I asked. "No," he said. "I mean to be a doctor the same way that Batman is a cop." Sol was peddling pot out of a tattoo parlor in Pasadena. Johnny went to speak to him, find out if he knew anything about the Elvis impersonating gook that was selling smack to teenagers. Sol played dumb for a while, but he pissed his pants and sang like a bird as soon as Johnny stomped on his big toe and threatened to take an inking needle to his face. Sol told Johnny to look for the Elvis impersonator in a Korean barbecue joint off South Alameda Street and took 15 milligrams of Valium as soon as he left. I'd been invited to a reception in the ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel to celebrate the upcoming inauguration of the new mayor, but Natalie had been invited to an awards ceremony that very same night. Natalie was a little less than 4 feet tall, and sometimes she wore platform shoes if she wanted to feel more sure of herself. She once dated a man with only one testicle. She had this thing, I guess you'd call it a fetish or a hang-up, or she liked the guys she was with to ejaculate on her face. I asked her if the man with just one testicle had produced a satisfactory amount of semen, and she said there wasn't any noticeable difference between him and anyone else she'd ever dated. I went to the awards ceremony with her, but at the gala that followed, she left me standing by myself at the buffet so she could go and have a drink with Philip Seymour Hoffman. I let her find her own ride home that night. After they treated his depression, Francisco started making a list of every term he could think up to describe a homosexual. He'd promised me free tickets to the exhibition of paintings by Lucian Freud at the Museum of Contemporary Art, but he still hadn't followed through. His uncle had gotten him a job there as a docent. It didn't pay anything, but he was collecting disability checks from the government anyway, and the work seemed to provide him with a sense of purpose. It helped him think less about the Quicksilver boy he'd fallen in love with anyway. He was having fewer and fewer anxiety attacks, but then he burst into tears one morning when the police apprehended him for stealing gourds from the farmer's market at 3rd and Fairfax. Lars had a house made of cedar down in Laurel Canyon, and he had 3 hard-bodied girls, a mountain of cocaine, and a refrigerator full of Diet Pepsi to help him celebrate the holiday weekend. Rumor had it that one of the girls was only 16 years of age, and that Lars was fully aware of this, though it did not prevent him from penetrating her vaginally, orally, and anally, using protection, of course. Lars's next-door neighbor was a psychic yoga instructor who the police sometimes called on for assistance in their investigations. She'd written 4 books, and for a time during the 70s had drawn a substantial number of followers, one of whom was smothered to death in 1976 while staging a reenactment of his birth. One of my sisters was digging for dinosaur bones in a decontaminated area near Chernobyl. She called and asked me to check in on our other sister, who had apparently fallen in love with a death row inmate in Texas she'd been corresponding with. This came to me as a surprise, but then I hadn't spoken to either of my sisters in over 6 months. I'd been caught up devising a truly unique marketing campaign for this movie my studio was releasing, a horror film about a man possessed by the soul of Charles Manson. My team and I had planted stories in the press, and we were doing all we could to perpetrate the totally fabricated rumors of a serial killer stalking the streets of West Hollywood. Randy ran a rug store in Rancho Cucamonga, and though there were plenty of places to buy a rug inside Los Angeles County, whenever Karen needed carpeting, she drove an hour east to see Randy. Randy had connections with some Turks, and there wasn't a place on the entire West Coast where you could find a better deal on a rug, or a more beautiful one either. Karen and I were lying naked on one of Randy's rugs the first time I fingered her. After she came, she said that she'd like to fly this carpet into the desert and disappear into a mirage that was 20 stories high, or disappear into a swirling wall of sanded dust. When I tried to kiss her cheek, she turned the other way. Tito's agent Ari kept a bleached human skull on his desk, and he liked to tell people that it belonged to a real Jew in Birkenau, but everyone knew that he'd really just paid Sam, who dug graves at Rosedale Cemetery, to dig up a skull for him, and gotten Jerry, who did taxidermy, to bleach it. Sam would never say the name that was on the grave he'd exhumed, but he said it was someone who'd been important. Ari sometimes threatened to shoot Sam if he didn't tell him whose skull was on his desk, but Sam didn't have very much to live for anyway, and he would just say to Ari that he'd never find out whose skull it was if he killed him now. Ari suspected that Sam had made a provision in his will for the name to be divulged after his death, but only in the event that his death was not somehow caused by Ari. Candy opened the newspaper and read a story about a man who'd held City Hall hostage with a bomb and threatened to blow it sky high if they didn't give him a star on the boulevard. She tried to remember if she was still dreaming, but she couldn't even remember what day it was. Candy's mother gave up prostitution when she had her baby, but the year Candy turned 7, she died of heat stroke or dehydration at Burning Man. Candy didn't finish reading the story in the paper, but if she had, she'd have discovered that a SWAT team sniper shot the man in the back of his head, and that the bomb he claimed to have had turned out to be nothing more than a few dozen Roman candles painted black and taped together. Stephen was supposed to be in Seattle recovering from a stem cell transplant, but word on the street was that he was tearing down the highway to Southern California in a stolen Volvo sedan, screaming into a cell phone about the appalling lack of sex appeal in the latest issue of Vanity Fair. His best friend Leon had lost the lease on a large piece of land and owed a lot of money to some lobstermen in Maine. Leon came to me looking for help. He pitched an idea for a movie that was obviously based on his own life and sounded just terrible. I told him he ought to be safe if he kept away from the eastern seaboard, but Leon insisted the lobstermen had goons lurking around LA, and that if he didn't pay up soon, they were going to start cutting off his fingers and toes. I asked what he wanted me to do about it. I said there was nothing I could do to help. I said I didn't want to hear another word about it. It turned out Tom liked to wear women's underwear, and he'd been looking for a tactful way to confess this to Jill. I suggested couples therapy, but he said they'd already been through all that when the Twin Towers went down, and he didn't think he could stomach it a second time. Tom told me he didn't used to wear women's underwear until he'd had a dream of the devil dancing over graves in nothing but a pair of lace panties. He looked me in the eye and asked earnestly whether I believed God wore boxers or briefs. Lucky for the Elvis impersonator, the cops busted him backstage at one of his shows before Johnny could get to him. In any event, Johnny visited the man in jail a few months later just so he could spit in his face and call him a gook. Johnny's son recovered from his overdose and spent 7 weeks in rehab. Lars was later found guilty of statutory rape. The judge sentenced him to 2 years in San Quentin, but his lawyer managed to have the sentence reduced to a $100,000 fine and 200 hours of community service. The horror film I'd been promoting was released to mixed reviews and a disappointing box office return. Natalie said it was my fault for not marketing it well enough, but I blamed the cast, the crew, and the general public. Last I heard of Leon, he joined the Navy and was stationed in the Philippines. He sent me a letter, but it was written in gibberish, and the only word I could make out was mango. Karen sold all her carpets and disappeared into the desert with my Porsche and $75,000 in government bonds. Well, I hope she trespasses on Indian land and winds up buried up to her neck next to an anthill. I hope the next time I see her, it's in the morgue, and her face is covered in welts. Thank you. All right. Next up, we got Georgie Kunkel.
How do I follow that? Oh my God. This is going to be tame. Anyway, this is not poetry. I guess that was, I don't know, was that poetry or prose? That was prose. Anyway, this is a serious book, and I'm going to read a little preface from it. My book is called My Sex Secrets by Grandma.
Oh, this is going to be tame.
No, you can go to sleep if you want to. It isn't going to be half as exciting as what you just heard. But it is a serious book. I wrote it after my late husband had cancer of the prostate for a long time, and he was told by a doctor that he would become impotent. Well, I wasn't quite sure what that was, but I looked it up. And I decided that I would celebrate sex as long as it lasted. And I sat down and I wrote this in one day. And I have a little essay, and then it was followed by a lot of little sayings and little pictures. And here's the introduction. As a mother of 4 and a grandma of, well, now at that time I was a grandma of 9, but now I'm a grandma of 18. I began exploring the need to be an adult human being. See, they're already leaving. And not a person limited only to mothering and grandparenting, but how does a person who is intelligent and educated stop playing the role of protective, sometimes controlling, parent, grandparent, and great-grandparent? Begin to encourage her offspring to see her as a whole human being, including the capacity for healthy sexual expression. Now, this was written in 1986, and when I first brought it out, my daughters looked at it, and people said, oh, God, that's a little too much. So I put it away for a long time. Then the baby boomers got to the point where they were grandparents, and they thought it was cool. So I reprinted it. One day I began to get the urge to write a book. I had always fantasized in the cartoon mode. You see, you can say anything in cartoons, things one probably wouldn't say in real life, face to face. Once I let my daydreaming have its way, there was no stopping me. Things began to pour into my mind, and soon I had 30 or 40 ideas that had been pent up inside me. Curiously, these ideas seemed to revolve around sexuality, my sexuality, and my way of dealing with it. Before letting you in on how I leapt onto the printed page, I must meander a bit. After all, a famous writer, James Joyce, also tapped into this technique, which now has the label of stream of consciousness. Joyce may have tapped into all this with the help of, or in spite of, alcohol. For some reason, I did it without alcohol. Would you believe that a little old lady born in the 20s and who remembers the radio days of Fibber, McGee, and Molly, who never said damn or hell, would ever fantasize a book like this? In my day, Fanny Hill was still an under-the-counter book. But this grandma had her eyes opened in the 60s when mothers spent a lot of time smelling out marijuana and wondering how to confront teenagers about it. Needless to say, there was little time to write. With me, it was not until my later years, when I began to wonder if sexuality would last a lifetime, that I had time to sit down to write this essay. Yes, I began to pour out the emotion that was put on hold all those years, raising 4 children who were testing the dress codes and saying, I don't care what Aunt Martha thinks, she can go to hell. Somehow the computer with its fast-flowing possibilities helped make this writing all come about. It was like I was involved in a conspiracy, and no one dared tell me what should come out of it. Suddenly, there came rushing out all the memories of sex that over the years we were trying to sandwich in between juniors getting up to pee in the middle of the night and our daughters crawling into bed with us at odd hours. It was a miracle that not even once were we caught in the act. You know what parents do when they aren't too tired or anxiety-ridden or sick. Each one was a separate and distinct happening, like the time that we had just found a new way to do it, even without a sex manual as a guide, and snap, off went the mousetrap in the kitchen cupboard. A snap loud enough to scare an erection into hiding. Now, you may be thinking that in the autumn of life, we aging grandparents have given up sex. We're supposed to get our kicks from cruises on the Caribbean or champagne toasted at 50th wedding anniversaries. This grandma doesn't blame you for such a mistaken notion as that. Of course, you never see cartoons about aging sex. Do you ever see the little king in the comics doing it with a little queen? Of course not. Neither do we hear about sex in nursing homes. Do they do it? Do the keepers of nursing homes allow it? How do they schedule it? Is it every Tuesday after basket weaving or Wednesday after the slideshow that Harry Carey brings in for entertainment? So when do they do it? Or is it true that old men can't get it up anymore? This lack of information about senior sexuality prompted me to finish this book so I could reminisce about sex in case it stopped when everyone says your husband begins to lose interest, or certain parts of his anatomy lose interest, or whatever. So here it is, this book about the joys and frustrations of sex over the years of our marriage, with only Marriage Manual 1937 as a guide. I remember before we were married, I certainly got the impression that I wasn't to do certain forbidden things until we said our vows. What these forbidden things were, I really didn't know. The only real contact I'd had with anything resembling a penis was when my little pal, a boy of course, wanted to play doctor, and he offered his penis to be examined. But before I could play the game, my mother nipped it in the bud. So from that time on, I only got snatches, not meant to be a pun, of ideas about sex. I guess I went through some tense moments before I was married, wanting to do it, and being afraid that God would strike me down if I ever figured out what it was I wanted to do. But getting back to this book, I finally had to put all the feelings about sex accumulated over years into this book. There is something special about a mini book. It can be held in one hand. It can be put down at any moment in a busy person's life. It can be opened at any place when one wants to resume looking at it after hiding it under a very small pillow. It would be a perfect book for people who need to break from the mundane, especially people who experience monthly cycles that can't be denied, like men's cycles can, or people like me who lived when contraceptives were only whispered about and who were brought up wearing bras. Now, don't let anyone tell you that women stopped wearing bras because they burned them. The plan was to burn them in a garbage container to protest women's confining roles. The irony is that the fire marshal wouldn't give the women a permit, so they didn't burn the bras. Women are so, they got to follow the rules. Even though the story circulated all over the country that it really took place. Women were so well acculturated to obey the laws, they didn't realize at first that many laws were actually keeping them in bondage. But women did go around braless to protest their inequality, and this personal act was considered radical. Those times in the 70s helped me find my awareness to myself as an evolving being. Even as a mother of 4, I was beginning to make a statement. At last, my statement is stretched to include these little sayings of mine that are usually not put on paper by grandma types. But now that they are out of Pandora's box, as it were, what to do with them? Should they be read in secret when grandpa is downtown playing sidewalk superintendent? Or could they be shared with all of you? As you now have guessed, I bit the bullet and faced the printing process. And even got up the nerve to hand these pages to a copy mart clerk who never blinked an eye as she put on the copies face down on the big machine, which luckily had no conscience.
We are running out of time.
Okay.
Keep going.
Anyway,
For the other folks, because we're going to be out of here at 9.
Yeah, okay. I gave samples of the book to several people, my sisters and some other people, and one of them said, it should be flushed down the toilet. And that's when I thought I should never, ever show it to anyone else. And anyway, now what is there to blush about when Grandma tells all? When she says intercourse is a pleasure, that each time may be the last, and that realization adds a little more excitement to each orgasm. Well, why should some folks be shocked? Grandmas are people too. One of my friends bought it to give to her mother on Mother's Day. Now there's a marketing idea. Are you now ready for the question? Is this little cartoon book worthy of sharing with you? Will my true sense of myself coming out of the closet sexually touch a similar chord in you, the reader? Recently, I sent this book to Ruth Westheimer. I don't know if you know who she is, Dr. Westheimer. And she wrote back and said she was quite interested in it. Well, of course she should be interested. That's all she writes about. So, that's the preface to all these little sayings I have in the book with these little illustrations. And if you want to see them, you can come up afterwards and look at them. Now, may I introduce Lydia Schwartz?
Yeah, Lydia.
Is that right, Schwartz?
This is even more tiny.
So just for your information, if there are 4 more people, we have about 5 minutes each.
This should be about 5 minutes, although it's different every time. I've been doing these shuffle poems, so who knows what order I'll read this in. Oh, crap. Fine. Now they're upside down. I'm sorry, there's no sex. Water is my religion. Water is a chill that draws the path of yes, oh please to never again. Water is my barrel-aged private cure, my ancient monster's home. Water is a dilution of vanity, sweetening vivid lies you tell your lover. Water is stiff and painful when you get too far from the tropical buckle. Water is a cleaner of shit by flush, a beat-driven corpuscle highway. Water is my religion. Water is lower than land and a dermis to earth's strange mantle. Water is semen worn sweetly, a thumb-shrimping wife of sleep. Water is icy forensic absence, a lack of goodbye, a tender void. Water is my religion. Water is a filter for truth, then a mattress for algae, then a washer of dirty sand. Water is what you use to propel your sacred poison, your pissing whisper. Water is antidote to regret, washing crime and love down the same fertile drain. Water is not acquainted with violation, but is nevertheless guilty again. Water is burning a stubborn cheek as a banner of unrepentant grief. Water is the fast, dark way over rocks to the wild that feeds you. Water is bubble mother, your night-soothing saline redemption. Water is never boiling when you hop in, but you stew if you stay and snooze. Water is the song of the storm, extreme on impossible ocean horizon. Water is willing to let you swim, but will not apologize for crocodiles. Water is my religion. Water is crystal fear, quenching frozen trust, raping your icicle daughter. Water is my religion. Water is what we are made of and what we require to love our own bellies. Water is a maker for fickle islands, a carver of valleys, the home of thunder. Water is throat-burning sky stuck forever in one fragile word. Water is radiators' gossip over breasts' abundance under fishy fleece. Water is clear and bland and all that is left after every promise breaks. Water is a path to invisibly shining rust monkey crossword paradise. Water is my religion. Water is fill for sun-puddling fountains, a caffeine-bearing oath. Water is the pelting of memory on fluttering eyelids. Water is a heartbeat, hookah boogie, cavern sleeper, fa-la-la Sunday. Water is to baptize, to be godly, to make your broken mark in secret. Water is festering blister and kind to fang and molar alike. Water is my religion. Water is a warm song that cradles your neck in the morning. Water is my religion. Water is the father of mud and all things noisy. It is the son of the flabby buttock. Water is death on a shiny white plate, mocking your beautiful thirst. Water is my religion. Water is busy before and after enduring what we call life, but has no interest in us. Water is spit-harsh, floating magic wanting to drown you home. Water is some street-muffled urban leak, concrete's own glacier. Water is sudsy Longfellow, stopping your breath when you only meant to swallow. Water is the taker away of all blood and bringer of fruitful decay. Water is a way to live if you let it, or a way to die if you don't. Water is deep foundation, plotting to murder the tyrant gravity. Water is my religion. Thaddeus Gunn.
This is an essay called How We Get That Way. I'm in a tiki bar down at the ferry dock getting drunk with some racists. We're all waiting for the Seahawks to get their asses kicked by the Eagles on Thursday Night Football. The racists are all drinking the same kind of beer and having a private conversation about chinks and gooks and zipperheads. I'm drinking tequila and texting my friend. God damn it, I hate white people, I say. Have you walked past a mirror lately? He texts back, Caucasian, please. When I say with racists, I mean can't get away from. This bar can hold just about us four and not much more. I'd be a bookmark if it wasn't for the empty seat on my left. Dion, Mooch, and Marshall squeezed up tight at the broadcast desk. They're all saying the game's going to the Eagles. While they say this, they're showing footage of Seahawks running back Marshawn Lynch in beast mode, slamming off 9 New Orleans defenders on a day of glory past. Longest touchdown run in NFL postseason history. It caused a measurable earthquake, 3.2 on the Richter scale. It's the NFL channel's way of giving hope to the condemned. It's cruel. There ought to be a law. And when I say private conversation, I mean shouting. The only private thing is I'm not part of it. The third guy down the bar looks like Santa would look if he was pissed off, hungover, and sitting on a boil. That gook chink zipperhead stuff chafes me. By now I've had about an army's worth of tequila. I'm as brave as Padre Miguel. I ask Angry Santa what he means by zipperhead. You know, gook, he says. Gook, I say. Yeah, you know, Asian. Oh, Asian. Like my wife, I say. And then shit gets real quiet. The Seahawks start their first series bass-ackwards, 10 guys on the field. After they get that bullshit sorted out, Lynch gets no yardage. A flag gets thrown. Looks like it's going to be business as usual. Fuck you, Angry Santa says. He's not even trying to pass off that remark like it was for the ref. Hey man, just checking. Just wanted to make sure I knew where everybody was coming from. Funny thing is, I just shared a ferry across from downtown Seattle with another bunch of racists, some upper middle class white ladies, the real housewives of West Seattle. They were pushing the mileage on a comment one of them made about how there's nothing white in White Center. I butt in with a joke. I say, pardon me, ladies, do you know what's white and 10 inches long? They say, I don't know. What is white and 10 inches long? I say, nothing. They look at me like they got a whiff of spoiled meat. The bartender tells Angry Santa he ought to shut the fuck up, then apologizes to me. I tell her she doesn't have to apologize to me. I'm not Asian. When she walks away, the guy to my right says, why don't you check up on my ass? The remark strikes me as hilarious and warms my heart. Why don't you check up on my ass is something I would have said when I was in grade school. I look at the guy who said it. He's doughy. He has a military haircut. Reminds me of somebody who might be my friend. Somebody with the smart-ass eloquence of a 10-year-old. On Mrs. Stevens' porch, the porch where I grew up in Pontiac, Michigan, me and all my black friends would shoot the dozens. Me, Lemmy, Telford, Ricky, Bun, Geg, Kevin, and Barry. We do this every day in the summertime, sometimes until the streetlights came on. Lemmy would start with, you so black, fireflies follow you around the daytime. Then Telford would follow up with, you so black, you walk outside, the sun go back down. Then Ricky say, motherfucker, you so black, you piss ink. And then it was time for the white kid. My best lob was this. You got so many people sleeping in the same bed at your house, when you get up at night, you got to put in a bookmark to keep your place. And then Telford would come back with, your head is nappy and your breath stank. Everybody fall out. I say, I went to Barry's house and asked what's for dinner. His mama said, see that roach on the wall? When he falls, we eat. They all laugh, nigga, you crazy. They call me nigger all the time. I never think to question it. I just savor my win. Mine was the only white family in the neighborhood. We moved there in 1967. We heard that racial tensions were high, but you couldn't tell that from our neighbors. I don't know how they found us, but every John Birch Society, NAG, or KKK member from the next county over showed up at our door. They wanted our solidarity to create a stronghold in the neighborhood. My dad would tell them in kind but absolutely certain terms to fuck off. Sometimes he'd even tell them that when he was still in his clerics after celebrating the Eucharist on Sunday over at a parish in some other whiter part of the city. Some white lady at church asked me once, "Are you the only drop of buttermilk in all those flies?" She was from Bloomfield Hills or Grosse Pointe or some shit. I was 8 years old. The next year in the 4th grade, I got my first girlfriend ever. Her name was Valerie. I didn't so much woo her as she claimed me imperiously. "You coming with me," she shouted. "I got me a white boy." On the playground at my school, she and the other little black girls with their frilly little dresses and their little processed braids tied up with pink plastic balls used to skip rope and sing songs that would make a pimp cough up his gin. "Hey, you black-eyed son of a bitch, your mama's in the cooking cucking red hot shit. Your father's in jail, your brother's in hell, your sister's on the corner yelling pussy for sale." I loved Valerie with an ardor the size of Levi Stubbs. So my wife shows up at the racist bar just in time for Vince Young of the Eagles to get intercepted by Cam Chancellor, and suddenly the place is filled with mirth shared by at least 2 races. Commentator Mike Mayock says, "Funky start, fun game." I put out my hand to the guy next to me. I say, "What's your name, man?" He's surprised all to hell. He says, "Jacob Singer." I say, "Jacob, this is my wife, Teresa." I can tell by the way he looks at her, he's just smitten. That makes me happy. "What do you do, Jacob?" "I'm active military. I'm a tank sergeant. I find bombs in Afghanistan." "Well," I said, "welcome home." My first contact with the military in any form was when Kevin and I got chased by a National Guardsman 5 months and 4 days after the Kent State Massacre. There was a riot going on at the high school, so they canceled school mid-morning, imposed a daylight curfew, and sent all the elementary school kids home. We lost him by ducking under some bushes, cutting down an alley, and hiding out in a dumpster until it got dark. My mom was hysterical when I finally got home. Later, I found out that 5 high school kids got shot. My 3 older brothers got gassed and maced. One of them got his nose broken. For 2 days after that, we watched from indoors as armored personnel carriers rumbled up the street toward the high school, followed by phalanxes of National Guardsmen, not one of which was black. I knew the curfew was off when I saw Ricky, Lemmy, Bun, Geg, and Kevin walking down the street past my house. They walked with their gazes fixed on their shoes the way men do in groups when they're listening intently. I ran out of the house after them. "Yo, niggas, wait up!" I shouted. And they stopped, and they turned, and they looked at me silently, and I stopped where I was 5 yards away, and Kevin broke away from the group and walked up to me, punched me lightly in the chest. "Say, man," he said, "why don't you kiss my black ass?" And then he put his arm around my shoulders and pulled me along with him into the group. By the time the Seahawks' Marshawn Lynch gets to really gashing the Eagles' D, I've got a good skin full of tequila. Jacob's telling me stories about bomb hunting. They form 2 columns and head out into the desert. Infantry with minesweepers in the front, tanks in the rear. Most of the time, the tanks just drive over the bombs. They get the tracks blown off. Then they spend the rest of the day in the sun, sweating like hell, putting a new set on so they can roll back to base. What's worse, he says, and when you hear a whoomp at the head of the column, then you have to walk up to the front with a bag and spend the rest of the day looking for body parts to put in it. "How'd you get that shit detail?" I asked. "I volunteered," he said. "What you doing next?" I re-upped. "I rotate back in May." I toast him. "Don't get dead, okay?" He says, "I'll do my best. L'chaim." Marshawn Lynch cracks off a 40-yard run. "Go, go, go!" We all scream. "Touchdown!" "Hell yes! That's my Negro!" I shout. The bar gets real quiet. Everybody looks at Teresa. "He does that sometimes," she says. "He thinks he's black." Everyone deflates with laughter. We drink. Marshawn Lynch tastes the rainbow, toasting his touchdown by eating a bag of Skittles on the sidelines. On the last Monday evening in August 1971, the cicadas are roaring. It's hot and muggy, the usual Michigan summer. People come out in the evening because it's the more tenable of the 2 weather choices, too damn hot and damn hot. My friends and I hang out on the front lawn looking for satellites in the night sky, talking about girls, doing nothing, sweating. In the distance, there's a whoomp, and then another whoomp, followed by several more. The sky to the east of us glows red-yellow. We sit up. Geg, Ricky, and Bun whisper something to each other and immediately run off. Kevin looks at me for a moment wide-eyed and then says, "I'm going home." "Okay," I say. "I'll see you soon." 12 days later, the former Grand Dragon of the Michigan Ku Klux Klan and former Secretary of State candidate Robert E. Miles is arrested along with 6 other Klansmen for bombing 10 of our school buses. When I hear the news, I go over to Kevin's house. I haven't seen him since that night. Mrs. Stevens meets me at the door. She tells me he's not coming out, that I need to go home and not come around anymore. Thanks.